Bon après-midi à tous. Nous allons commencer la conférence de presse avec la ministre Joly. Good afternoon, everybody. We will start the press conference with Minister Joly in a few seconds. Please note that the minister has about 15 minutes for this press conference. Veuillez noter que la ministre a environ 15 minutes à allouer à la conférence de presse. Madame Joly, c'est à vous.
Merci. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you, although it's very late at night here in Brussels. It's nearly 11 o'clock. And after this, I will be joining the US-Canada committee with my colleagues. And of course, I'll do so virtually. So now I'm back from an excellent visit to Latvia. Canada leads the NATO brigade in Latvia, which is composed of more than a dozen countries. And this is our biggest deployment of troops outside of Canada. We just led a very successful exercise in Europe. This in Latvia. This is the biggest exercise that was Canadian led in Europe in 30 years. And we're very happy. It went very well. And so I just wanted to thank all the women and men that are serving in Latvia and representing so well Canada and reinforcing again the deterrence along the eastern flank of NATO. Out of Latvia, we are also training Ukrainian officials and officers. So this is something we do with Latvia. And finally, tomorrow I'm participating in a NATO foreign minister meeting. It will be the first time that it will be led by the new Secretary General, Mark Rutte. And of course, we will be holding the meeting at the time where there are lots of discussions regarding the intentions of the new US administration. It will be also the last meeting of my colleague, the Secretary of State of the US, Tony Blinken. Donc, rapidement, en français, je viens tout juste d'une excellente visite, j'arrive tout juste d'une excellente visite en Lettonie. En Lettonie, nous avons le plus grand contingent de troupes, de soldats canadiens à l'extérieur du Canada. Nous avons dirigé un exercice important de l'OTAN, le plus grand exercice dirigé par le Canada des 30 dernières années. Et depuis le début de l'invasion de l'Ukraine, nous avons maintenant triplé notre contingent, nos troupes en Lettonie. En plus de la Lettonie, nous formons les officiers ukrainiens avec certains membres de l'OTAN. Et puis, nous continuons de renforcer la dissuasion tout au long de la frontière est de l'OTAN. Du reste, je suis présentement à Bruxelles et puis je vais participer à la réunion de l'OTAN qui aura lieu demain. Ça sera la première réunion du nouveau secrétaire général de l'OTAN, Mark Rutte. Et puis, nous aurons l'occasion de parler aussi des intentions de la nouvelle administration américaine, alors que ce sera aussi la dernière réunion de mon collègue, le secrétaire d'État américain, Tony Blinken. Alors voilà, je suis prête à répondre à vos questions.
If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. As usual, one question, one follow-up. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée. Comme à l'habitude, une question et une question de suivi. Christian, la parole est à vous.
Bonjour, Madame Joly. Merci de prendre nos questions. J'aimerais vous parler de la rencontre à Mar-a-Lago. Il y avait un seul ministre, alors qu'il y avait 3 ou 4 secrétaires d'État potentiels. Est-ce qu'on était en désavantage numérique?
Non, l'objectif du Canada et du premier ministre Trudeau, c'était de parler de 2 sujets en particulier. Celui des tarifs et surtout de présenter notre plan sur la frontière. Et on sait qu'avec l'administration américaine, on doit mettre l'avant nos propres priorités pour avoir le plus d'arguments pour les convaincre. Alors, le ministre Leblanc était là. Et entre-temps, moi, je suis en contact avec plusieurs autres membres de l'équipe Trump. Et j'étais donc à Washington juste un peu avant et j'ai participé aux préparatifs avec différents membres de l'administration américaine pour nous assurer que le tout aille très bien.
Comme la frontière et le fentanyl, la drogue, semble être une préoccupation principale de
Oui.
M. Trump, ça deviendra donc un aspect essentiel du comité où vous allez aller votre troisième ou quatrième réunion. Donc, est-ce que maintenant qu'on a eu cette rencontre-là, quel sera, vous, votre rôle? Et maintenant qu'on connaît davantage les intentions de M. Trump, comment ça change les travaux de préparation?
Différentes choses. Premièrement, j'aurai l'occasion de travailler avec le nouveau secrétaire d'État, Marco Rubio, lorsqu'il va être confirmé. Deuxièmement, j'ai beaucoup de conversations aussi avec des sénateurs influents dans le cercle Trump, dont Lindsey Graham, à qui j'ai parlé encore 2 fois en fin de semaine, avant la réunion, après la réunion. Et aussi Jim Rich, qui sera vraisemblablement le président du Comité des affaires étrangères du Sénat américain. Mais je vous dirais que mon rôle, c'est aussi beaucoup parler de géopolitique. Alors, suite à la réunion qui a eu lieu vendredi, j'ai eu plusieurs conversations, notamment avec le chef de cabinet Zelensky, notamment avec plusieurs de nos alliés, et certainement, j'aurai l'occasion d'en parler demain à l'OTAN. Donc, le Canada est très proche des États-Unis, comprend bien la dynamique politique, on a des contacts à tous les niveaux, et donc nos alliés se tournent vers nous et nous demandent beaucoup de conseils et d'avis. Et donc, c'est mon rôle, moi, en tant que ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Merci. Dylan Robertson, the floor is yours.
Thanks for taking our questions, Minister.
It's a
I just
pleasure,
wanted-
Dylan.
Good to hear from you. I
Good to
just
see you.
wanted to get your response to comments from President Sheinbaum of Mexico today. She said Canada is like the US in having much worse fentanyl problems than Mexico. She argues that some forms of decriminalization might have contributed to that. And then she's also quoted as saying that Canada, quote, could only wish they had the cultural riches Mexico has. Do you have any response to any of those comments?
Well, first and foremost, I think that we have a positive relationship with Mexico, and we need to work with the country. That's definitely my goal. I was the first foreign minister to meet with President Sheinbaum after she was inaugurated, after she won the election back in July. We have this very important trade agreement amongst Canada, Mexico, and the US. And I know there's been many conversations in Canada about how we can work together and how we can, at the same time, protect our interests. But I fundamentally believe that many conversations when it comes to diplomacy are always better when they remain private. And that's certainly my goal when it comes to Mexico.
And my follow-up is just about Trump and the Arctic. We know that this came up in the dinner with the Prime Minister. We're working on this Arctic foreign policy. Do you have any sort of indication as to what the Trump administration's priorities are when it comes to the Arctic? And does that have any implication on our own Arctic policy?
Well, this was actually an idea that we presented to President Trump because we know that he's been interested in the Arctic in the past. We know also that we've been working on our Arctic foreign policy and that we're going to present our Arctic foreign policy in the coming days. And so based on that, it was the idea to talk about it, to make sure that we can protect our homeland together. And more than ever, we know that there is not only a presence, of course, of Russia in the Arctic, but also a collaboration with China. And so we have to do more, and we have to change our threat assessment of what's going on in the Arctic. And we need to work with the US, and we need to work also with Nordic states. We know also that President-elect Trump is very interested in the production of icebreakers. And we're now part of the Ice Pact between Finland and the US. We have an entire national shipyard strategy, which has made possible for Canada to be able to build icebreakers out of the Davie shipyard in Quebec. And we are in the midst of building 8 new icebreakers. And Davy has also bought the Finnish shipyard. And we're looking also at working together to make sure that we increase production in the US of icebreakers. So this is certainly something that we're following up closely with the Trump administration. And this is certainly something that we want to push forward in the context of our Arctic foreign policy.
Thank you. Mélanie Marquis, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Madame Joly.
Allô, Mélanie.
Il y a quelques jours, en France, le Quai d'Orsay a affirmé par rapport au mandat d'arrêt qui avait été émis par la Cour pénale internationale qu'il faudrait tenir en considération les immunités de M. Netanyahou, de M. Galland. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça? Puis est-ce que ça change la position du Canada qui était inverse, sauf erreur?
Je ne commenterai pas sur qu'est-ce qu'un autre pays a pris comme position concernant le tribunal pénal international. Notre position est la même et je l'ai exprimée et le premier ministre l'a déjà exprimé par le passé. Et du reste, quant à savoir quels seront les plans de voyage du premier ministre Netanyahou, c'est une question hypothétique.
L'autre sujet aussi par rapport, il y en a plein, mais par rapport aux États-Unis, la rencontre qui a eu lieu à Mar-a-Lago, sur les tarifs, on sait qu'en 2018, le gouvernement avait élaboré vraiment toute une liste de produits qui feraient l'objet de mesures de rétorsion. Est-ce qu'il y a une liste en ce moment qui est prête pour répliquer à des tarifs qui seraient imposés par M. Trump? Puis qu'est-ce que vous avez dit à vos homologues là-dessus? Je m'excuse.
On sait que le président Trump a tendance à utiliser les tarifs comme une façon de négocier avec différents pays. Et on sait que c'est certainement son approche qu'il veut mettre de l'avant dans le contexte de son deuxième mandat. Maintenant, il faut prendre cette menace de tarifs sur le Canada très, très au sérieux. Alors, on fait tout le travail nécessaire pour être en mesure de protéger nos industries et notre économie. Entre-temps, on sait que lorsque vient l'administration Trump, ce qui est fondamental, c'est la relation avec le président lui-même. Et c'est pourquoi c'est important pour le premier ministre Trudeau d'aller à Mar-a-Lago, de s'asseoir avec le président Trump, d'être capable d'avoir une conversation en se regardant les deux dans les yeux et d'être capable d'aborder des sujets difficiles, mais aussi des solutions possibles. Et c'est exactement ce que le premier ministre Trudeau a fait. Et moi, mon boulot, c'est de prendre ces discussions-là, de partir de là et de faire en sorte de parler aussi avec différentes personnes au sein de l'administration américaine, dont Lindsey Graham, dont Jim Rich, dont je pourrais continuer, mais bref. Et en même temps, d'être capable d'expliquer à mes homologues à travers le monde ce qui se passe exactement aux États-Unis.
Merci. Next question is from Alex Bellingal. The floor is yours.
Hi, Alex. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to unmute. Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
The Arctic strategy,
Yeah.
the election of Trump, I know obviously you've been working on that since before he was reelected. But the fact that he was reelected, can you talk about how that may have changed what you guys were preparing and how that has influenced what's going to come out in the coming days?
Well, a couple of things. I think that it is normal that Canada leads the conversation regarding the Arctic because we're an Arctic nation, because we have huge geography in the Arctic. And we started that conversation internally and working with the Inuit and Northerners back in the spring. We wanted to make sure that we would be doing that along with them. It was important to do so. And meanwhile, while we were developing that together with the consultations that are necessary, we were working with our allies. And of course, we were working with the Biden administration. That's why also we announced the ICE Pact back at the NATO summit in Washington in July. But meanwhile, also that's why I brought the foreign ministers of the 5 Nordic countries in Iqaluit back in September. And tomorrow, along with the Secretary of State for the US, Tony Blinken, and the foreign ministers of the 5 Nordic states, we will be having an informal Arctic security dialogue on the margins of NATO. So this is something that is close to my heart. this is something I think that is really key for Canada's interests, and I'll be able to talk more about it in the coming days. Meanwhile, we knew that President Trump was very much interested in what was happening in the Arctic, was preoccupied by the fact that there was not enough icebreakers that were being built by allies, including, of course, the US. And so we were in solution mode, and we thought that by talking about that and making it a priority, it was actually a win-win for us and also for the Trump administration.
Just on another subject, going back to Mexico, obviously, in the past few weeks, I guess we've heard talk of a potential. Some people want us to go solo with a bilateral trade agreement with the United States that excludes Mexico. Have you had any conversations with your Mexican counterpart or anybody in the Mexican government about that? And what do they think? What are they telling you about that talk that's going on?
So I've been in contact with Mexican leaders, but it is definitely my plan to engage in the coming days. I've been a lot on the road, and I wanted to make sure also that I was able to have conversations first with American leaders within the Senate and within the Trump administration. But I think that my job as Canada's top diplomat is to talk to everybody that is necessary to protect Canada's interests. And therefore, of course, I'll be in contact, and of course, I'll have these conversations. And I think we have open channels of conversations. And I think also the Prime Minister spoke with President Sheinbaum when they were at APEC and also at the G20. And I think that channel of communication is also very important.
Thank you.
And,
Next question.
meanwhile, just Alex, as for the details of the conversations, well, I'll answer you the same way I just answered your colleague, which is, you know, sometimes in diplomacy and many times in diplomacy, it's always better when conversations remain private, because that's how we're able to ultimately succeed in our cooperation and ultimately coming up with results that are important for our countries.
Thank you. Next question is from Karina Roman. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Thanks for taking
Karina.
Hi.
Pleasure.
A couple questions. My first is our Ambassador Hillman was just on CNN moments ago and says that plans are underway in case retaliatory tariffs are necessary, obviously pointing to what we've done in the past when we dealt with this the first time. How far along are those plans? I mean, I know the hope is to avoid tariffs and all of that, but how far along do we need to go in that plan to be ready just in case?
Well, Karina, you've asked me the question before the election whether we had a plan for the Trump administration or the Harris administration. I told you yes. And then afterwards, when President Trump was elected, we started implementing that plan. And so, of course, we knew because of conversations he had in the past that tariffs was a strategy that he was willing to use, as he did during his first mandate, and also that he was preoccupied with the border. That's why coming out of our first US-Canada committee, Minister Freeland and I mentioned that these were the two priorities, tariffs and border. And so we'll continue to work on that, and we will be able to protect Canada's interests. But meanwhile, as I just mentioned, we also know that relationships are important and that Canada has lots of arguments to present to the Americans and has a lot of tools to defend our industries and defend our economy. And of course, as a good government, we are looking at all these tools possible, and we'll make sure that we send a clear message to the Americans.
And my follow-up question is, you talked in the beginning about how part of your meeting tomorrow morning with the foreign ministers is to talk regarding sort of, I guess, get a sense of the intentions of the new administration that will be coming in, the Trump administration. Yep. How do you prepare? How does NATO and how do the foreign ministers at NATO prepare for those intentions when we're talking about an administration that is notoriously unpredictable?
I think what is important for our European colleagues to understand is how much China is important to the US and to Canada, and how much we need to take this threat very seriously. And that ultimately that there is a connection between what is happening in the Indo-Pacific and China's supporting Russia's economy and DPRK troops being in Russia and potentially also in Ukraine, while at the same time, the European theater is undergoing Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And that is something that our NATO allies need to understand. And they also need to work with us because it is clearly a priority of the future Trump administration. And so when I talk about the fact that I'm here talking in Europe, talking to many of our allies about the impact of the Trump administration, I also talk about the priorities as we see them of the Trump administration and also its future relationship with to China. And that is something that I think a lot of European allies, including also Ukrainians, are very interested in hearing and are asking lots of questions and are seeking a lot of advice.
Thank you, Minister Joly. This concludes the press conference. Merci, Madame Joly. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.